Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on German politics. After years of hesitation, Germany has ratified the EU CETA free trade agreement with Canada. 559 members of parliament voted for the relevant law on Thursday in the Bundestag, and 110 MPs voted against. The economy is hoping for a boost in trade with the North American country and further agreements with other countries such as Chile and Mexico. Activists and social organizations had already made critical comments beforehand. The agreement would create special rights for foreign investors and put corporate profits ahead of climate and environmental needs, according to their accusations. CETA can only come into force once all 27 EU member states have agreed. However, many countries are still missing, including Italy and France. Both sides concluded negotiations on the agreement in 2016. It has been provisionally applied since September 2017, and this means that 98% of all goods traded between the EU and Canada are no longer subject to customs duties. Canada itself has already completed ratification. In 2021, German goods worth 10 billion euros were exported to Canada, while imports totaled 6.2 billion. However, this is only 0.6% of the total German trade volume. According to trade associations, however, the volume has already increased by around a fifth since the provisional application of CETA. The so-called Traffic Light Coalition in Germany had recently made it clear in a position paper that it wanted to anchor sustainability standards such as climate requirements and minimum working conditions in future trade agreements. According to critics, this makes negotiations with many countries more difficult. Nevertheless, the traffic light parties, Social Democrats, Greens, and Liberals want to work to ratify the Mercosur agreement with the South American countries Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. A speedy conclusion to the negotiations with Chile and Mexico is also being sought. Trade relations between the EU and the USA, which are currently being overshadowed by huge subsidies for companies manufacturing in the USA, are also to be deepened. The federal government wants to give Ukraine more Gepard-type anti-aircraft gun tanks to defend against Russian attacks. Chancellor Olaf Scholz made it clear in a conversation with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that we can send a number of Gepard tanks to Ukraine again. That was said by government spokesman Steffen Hebestreit on Wednesday in Berlin. Details on arms deliveries would only be made known once the handover has taken place. Since the Bundeswehr has not had any Gepard since 2012, they are not from the Bundeswehr, Hebestreit said. This left only one delivery from industry stocks or from Qatar, where World Cup stadiums are protected against possible terrorist attacks from the air by German Gepard anti-aircraft gun tanks. So far, 30 of the tanks have been delivered to Ukraine from the stocks of the manufacturer KMW. In order to attract more workers to Germany, the federal government wants to simplify the rules for entry and the recognition of professional qualifications. A corresponding plan was approved by the cabinet on Wednesday. Among other things, it provides that recognized foreign skilled workers should also be able to work in occupations that have little or nothing to do with their training. In addition, non-EU foreigners should be given the opportunity to relocate to Germany to look for a job via a points system. Discussions between the Social Democrats, the Liberals, and the Greens are to be expected on this point in particular until a draft law is available. Easier labor immigration is part of a package of legislative proposals on asylum and migration policy that are to be passed or at least initiated by the end of the year. Among other things, Interior Minister Nancy Faeser wants to make naturalization easier. On Friday, the Bundestag should vote on the so-called right of residence. It is intended to offer prospects to well-integrated foreigners who have been living in Germany for several years without a secure status. Anyone who has lived in the country for 5 years as of October 31st and has not committed a criminal offense should be given 18 months to meet the requirements for long-term residence, and this includes knowledge of German and securing their own livelihood. The population in Germany has grown by almost 2.9 million people since 2014, mainly due to the influx of refugees. At the same time, immigration dampened the demographically caused decline in the number of people of working age, as the Federal Statistics Office announced in Wiesbaden on Tuesday. In the first half of the current year, the Federal Office registered a strong immigration surplus at more than 1 million people. It reached the highest half-year value since reunification. Between the end of 2014 and June 2022, the proportion of the working age population between the ages of 15 and under 65 fell from 65.8% to 63.6%, according to information from Wiesbaden. Migration moderated this downward trend. Although the proportion of employable people in the foreign population also fell, it was still significantly higher than that of German citizens. However, the labor force participation varies among foreigners. The employment rate for 15 to under 65-year-olds from Eastern EU countries was comparatively high in 2021. It was 78% for Poles, 75% for Romanians, and 64% for Bulgarians. By contrast, only 35% of Syrians and 45% of Afghans were employed. The lower level of education is likely to play a role here. Overall, from the end of 2014 to the end of June 2022, the number of people with foreign citizenship increased by more than 4.3 million, while the number of those with German citizenship fell by more than 1.4 million. In the first half of 2022, there was a peak in net immigration. That means the positive balance between immigration and emigration. From January to June this year, net immigration was more than 1 million foreign nationals. This is the highest figure since reunification within a half year. At the peak of the flight movement in 2015 and 2016, the migration balance in the second half of 2015 was 756,000. The state of Bremen will receive 6 million euros to mitigate the consequences of Brexit. Because the UK's exit from the EU will have economic and social implications, the European Commission has now made money available. 650 million euros will go to Germany. Part of it is distributed by the federal states, or to the federal states. This was announced by Bremen's Senate, and they want to use the money for the contact office in London and the fishing port, among other things. The former is to receive €500,000 euros and strengthen economic relations with Great Britain. €3.35 million are to go to the port to support companies there, including through investments in infrastructure. Another €2.2 million would be used to better equip the country's border checkpoints once again. According to the Senate, before the plan can be implemented, an agreement must be signed with the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs. According to the industry, the €49 ticket for local transport is likely to be further delayed. The start date will be May 1st, said the general manager of the Association of German Transport Companies, Oliver Wolf, to the German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung on Tuesday. It's not possible much earlier. There's still a lot to do before everything is administratively settled. He cited the tariff approval process as an example. In addition, the tariff system of the transport associations would have to be changed. Meanwhile, the federal transport minister Volker Wissing is pushing for the ticket to be introduced quickly, despite concerns. The Germany ticket is a topic at the Digital Transport Ministers' Conference on Tuesday, was a topic. Wissing had given the target for the introduction of the new ticket for €49 per month at the beginning of 2023. It is to be the successor to the €9 ticket, which was sold millions of times in the summer. Wissing urges that the plans be implemented quickly. There is a unanimous decision by the Prime Minister's Conference That binds everyone, he says. It is important that this is now implemented quickly and that new things are not constantly being discussed. He said this to the Funke Media Group in Germany. Citizens waited for the ticket. The aim is to introduce it as quickly as possible in the coming year, but the exact start date is still unclear. Lower Saxony's Minister of Transport, Olaf Lies, assumes that the ticket will certainly not start before March 1st, or rather on April 1st. There is also a dispute over funding. According to the plans, the ticket will cost 3 billion euros. The federal and state governments each finance half of it. The association general manager Wolf told the FAZ, the German Frankfurter Allgemeine, 3 billion euros will not be enough. The Taxpayers Association called on the federal government to forego federal subsidies for the ticket and to leave the financing to the states. It would be wrong to pump billions into a subsidized nationwide ticket, said the association president Rainer Holznagel to the German Augsburger Allgemeine Zeitung. The regional transport, like financing, is a matter for the federal states. They also could do it financially, he says. While the federal government is sitting on a minus of 100 billion euros, the states have a plus of 24 billion euros. They regard transport policy as their sovereignty, except when it comes to financing. Then the federal government should step in, he said. Yeah, but if the federal government wants this ticket and they are pushing for it, they have to pay for it. Sorry, mister. Minister Lisa Paus has announced that the planned regulation on so-called paternity leave will be anchored in law next year. The 2-week release after the birth is coming, not this year, but in 2024. That's what Paus told the newspapers of the Funke Media Group. The economic situation is currently difficult, especially for small and medium-sized companies. That's why I want to get this important project on track next year, said Paus. And according to Paus, the 2-week leave of absence after the birth should be laid down in the Maternity Protection Act. Parents must be supported in their wish for a partnership to share family work. Especially in the first time after the birth, it's important that parents have time for each other and, of course, the baby. That's what the minister said. This is also important so that fathers can develop a close relationship with a child early on. The Greens politician described the exemption as another important building block for the compatibility of family and work. With their support, employers made an important contribution, they say. The so-called traffic light parties had agreed in the coalition agreement to legally allow 2 weeks of paid leave after the birth. With the proposed legislation, Germany is implementing an EU directive anyway. In Germany, parents can already take advantage of the so-called parental allowance. If both parents take part in the care of the child, the loss of regular income is compensated for up to 14 months. With the so-called Elterngeld Plus, this is possible for up to 28 months. Then they receive half of the payments. The European Union taking on debt to deal with the economic consequence of Corona does not violate the basic law. This was announced by the Federal Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe on Tuesday. Accordingly, the federal government and the federal parliament, the Bundestag, were allowed to approve the EU decision to borrow a total of 750 billion euros. It was said on Tuesday that neither the competences of the European Union had been exceeded, nor was the budgetary responsibility of the Bundestag affected. In 2021, the judges in Karlsruhe gave the green light in the summary proceedings, but made it clear that a violation of the constitution was possible. This has now been examined in the main proceedings. The recovery program, called Next Generation EU, is intended to help the EU countries to get back on their feet after the pandemic. For the first time, the EU Commission is incurring large-scale debt. It's about a volume of the set 750 billion euros at 2018 prices. If inflation is taken into account, that is now more than 800 billion euros. The countries receive part of the money as grants that do not have to be repaid, the rest as loans. By the end of 2058, the debts should be settled at the latest. The largest sums go to particularly hard-hit countries such as Italy and Spain. Germany expected grants of almost 26 billion euros net. The money should flow into hydrogen research, climate-friendly mobility, and a more digitally oriented education system. The purchase of electric cars, buses, and trains is to be promoted and the charging infrastructure expanded. On the other hand, according to the Federal Audit Office, Germany is the largest net contributor with an estimated around 65 billion euros. The authority had spoken of a watershed in the European financial architecture and warned of risks for the federal budget. This is exactly where the plaintiffs come in. They feared that in the end Germany may have to pay the bill alone if states no longer meet their payment obligations. An incalculable debt pull threatens for decades. In addition, the program has no basis in the European treaties, they say. They demanded in advance that Germany must withdraw from the program or it will be terminated altogether. The lawsuits were directed against the law with which the Bundestag approved the German participation. In the summer negotiations, the federal government defended joint borrowing for the EU's reconstruction fund, and in the situation at the time in spring 2020, resolute joint action by the member states was necessary. And this concludes this week's Germany news, but tomorrow I'll be back, of course, and I hope you'll be too. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.